Howdy folks, my name is Nick. This is the Toccoa Defensive Training YouTube channel. You may recognize me from the Archetype of Man YouTube channel. That channel is predominantly focused on some aspects of training, but more than likely gear reviews, including firearms, holsters, optics, things like that. So here on Toccoa Defensive Training, we're going to focus more on the training aspect of firearms ownership, as well as safety and things like that. You might be asking yourself, why should we listen to you? Well, the short answer is only you can make that decision, but I'll begin with a brief introduction. Among the things that are not relevant to what I'll be discussing on here, I am a military veteran, United States Navy, 4 years. I had some weapons training there. None of that training is relevant to what we'll be talking about here on this channel and the training that I'll be offering in person, which is civilian self-defense and concealed carry. I'm a fairly recent graduate of the Rangemaster Instructor Development course taught by Tom Givens and a perpetual student of firearms. I've been shooting for 2 decades now. The last decade or so fairly seriously. I would say more often than not, there's at least 3 days a week that I am shooting. In that time, I have helped a lot of new shooters, both family, friends, things like that, get familiar with firearms, especially during the COVID pandemic when a lot of people were panic buying. I've also managed a local gun store, and I am a little bit familiar with a lot of the questions that new gun owners or first-time gun owners have. As you can tell from the sound, we're out on the range today. So the topic that we'll be covering today is defensive firearms. What are they? What can they be? Do you have a defensive firearm or not? You might have inherited something. Will that work, or do you need to go spend more money? So the short answer is all firearms can be defensive firearms. What I mean by that is if a firearm is in good working order and it is safe, it can be a defensive firearm. The longer and more nuanced answer to that question is going to be your particular use case. There's a whole lot in the world of firearms that is correctly answered with, it depends. So where you live, the legality of owning certain things, your skill level, how many people in the home might need to use that firearm and their skill levels, as well as other considerations like the layout of your home, over penetration of projectiles, and the location of occupants inside that home, and just a risk assessment. So we'll be talking about long guns today, shotguns in this case. We may talk about rifles a little bit too, and handguns. I do want to go ahead and posit the opinion that the old saying, it's the Indian, not the arrow, applies here. Whatever firearm you have or combination of firearm, ammunition, accessories you have is never going to be a substitute for practice and training and reaching levels of proficiency where you can put those rounds where they need to go. Doesn't matter if you spend $10,000 on a completely custom setup or you have a $200 firearm. If you can't shoot it well and under proficiency standards for both time and accuracy, it doesn't matter. Now we'll start looking at some guns. So let's start by dispelling some things. This is a Stealth Arms Platypus. This is a 1911 pistol. It is a 9mm. Yes, typically they're chambered in .45. This one is a 9mm, and it uses Glock 17 magazines. So you get the best of both worlds. According to a lot of people, you have readily available Glock mags. You have a very nice trigger on a very shootable gun for most folks. These guns are typically custom ordered, and it's got a red dot and a threaded barrel for a suppressor and a rail for a light. And paired with something like this Toccoa Velo holster, that's a nice setup, right? So the downside to something like this is these guns are between $1,500 to $2,000-ish. Will it work as a defensive firearm? Absolutely. I don't think anybody would debate that. Where the conversation is going to take a turn is I am not of the opinion that you need something like that. We go down here. This is a CZ P07, also a 9mm. This one is a double action, single action gun, meaning that the trigger serves 2 purposes. That first shot is going to be a long, heavy-ish double action pull. The slide would reciprocate, and then you hit resets and you have a lighter single action pull. This one, again, also a 9mm, 15 round magazine capacity. I had it milled for a red dot sight. This is a lot more affordable than the Platypus, but still don't think you need one of these. This is a 5-shot Taurus 605 Defender 357 Magnum. 357 Magnum revolvers can safely chamber and fire 38 special. So big difference in round capacity, right? We go from 19 rounds in the Platypus with that magazine to 15 rounds in the CZ to 5 rounds here. This might be a better option than those two, depending on where you live, magazine capacity restrictions, and whatnot. Now, some people will espouse the opinion that these are useless in the current year. I'm not of that opinion. This gun, if you will look at it, has some marks on it because it's been carried. Paired with a good holster, like this Harry's Holsters Icon 2.0, this gun carries just as easily, in fact, more comfortably than the other two pistols I just showed you. In terms of rounds, that revolver shoots this. That is a 357 Magnum. Those other two pistols shoot this, which is a 9mm. 357 Magnum is more powerful. 38, a little bit weaker than 9mm, but still acceptable. Bear in mind when I say you don't need something like the other two guns, I'm not telling you that you shouldn't get them. I'm not saying that you have to go from a revolver or something more basic to those guns. I'm saying that if what you have is a Taurus 605 357 Magnum 5-shot gun, and you would rather not spend the money or don't want another gun for whatever reason, only you know your circumstances, your effort might not be best spent listening to people tell you that what you have is useless. Spend that same effort and energy to do dry fire drills. And by dry fire, I just mean practicing with an unloaded gun. One of the great things about revolvers, they're incredibly simple to make sure they're unloaded. Activate your cylinder release, swing the cylinder out. It's instantly plain to see for anybody that that gun is unloaded or loaded, whatever the case may be. Once you've completely verified that it's unloaded, you practice getting your grip, your sight alignment, and then getting your trigger press down so that you don't disturb the sights while you are pressing the trigger. Dry fire is important regardless of what gun you pick. But again, if that's what you have, it's perfectly viable. Proficiency in getting those rounds where you need them to go in a timely fashion matters more than what you're using. Now we'll move on to long guns. I didn't bring anything super tactical out today. This rifle, while it looks all cool and snazzy and whatnot, and it is a bolt action Ruger American Ranch 300 Blackout, which you can find that caliber in AR-15s and the like. And it is clear. So it's a bolt action, meaning that each time I fire, I have to manually chamber another round. Commonly found for things like hunting, which is actually, believe it or not, what this is set up for, even with the suppressor and this optic. This is a thermal, night vision, and daylight optic that I am reviewing from D&T Optics. So it looks super snazzy and tactical and stuff. It's still a bolt action rifle. You might have inherited one of these from a family member. You might be into hunting. You may not be able to get an AR-15 or something similar. If this is what you have, would it work for defense use? Maybe. That's not so much the rate of fire of the bolt, which again, the gun is clear, but if we dry fire here, safety's off, bam. It's not the slowest thing in the world to shoot. That being said, it would be more, for me, driven by the optic. How fast can you get the gun on target? Because in a defensive context, time matters. You're reacting to something. With this particular setup, I wouldn't really want to grab it for home defense because the optic has a minimum magnification of 3 times, and depending on where I've had it set up from hunting, it would be a lot more hassle than it's worth to try to configure this setup for home defense. However, there's nothing saying that you can't take that same gun and put a red dot or a low power optic on it and make it a viable home defense option if that's what you have. The 300 Blackout caliber in this case is commonly used for home defense, maybe not so much in bolt action guns, but definitely in AR-15s. Now we'll move on to shotguns. This is a pump action shotgun, meaning that for each round fired, you have to slide the fore end to eject the empty shotgun shell and chamber a new one. This particular gun is a Remington 870 Super Mag, so it'll handle pretty much all manner of 12 gauge shells except for the little mini shells. It is spray painted, it's got a red dot on it, and it's got an incredibly long barrel with interchangeable chokes. This gun is my hunting shotgun. Would it work for home defense? Absolutely. With shotguns, the gun itself becomes a little bit less of a determining factor than the ammunition because there's such a wide variety of ammunition. And we're going to take a look at a couple different types of ammo here in a second. Birdshot is what I would use for dove hunting, shooting clays. It is typically the cheapest shotgun ammunition you can find. But it's also the least effective for home defense. Hopefully when we dissect a couple common shells here, you'll see the difference. So a shotgun shoots typically multiple projectiles. The barrel is most typically not rifled. It is a smooth bore barrel. The choke at the end helps determine the shot pattern or the pattern of the pellets that come out. Pairing the right ammunition to your shotgun and establishing what that pattern is at distances inside your home to figure out your point of aim. What ammunition is going to give you the best chance of keeping that pattern where it needs to be in a defensive context so that you don't have rounds missing the target, going through walls and potentially hitting other people. Again, you're probably not carrying this out in public, so this is for the context of home defense. You can use things like slugs, which are typically one projectile, heavy, 7/8 of an ounce up to 1.25 ounces of lead. Just one really big chunk of lead coming out of the end of this thing. Again, if you have the typical shotgun, it's not going to have a rifled barrel, so you're not getting the spin stabilization on that projectile unless you do have a rifled slug barrel, not as common. And a slug will work. At home defense distances, definitely, and you can actually get decent hits out to 50 or 75 yards in my experience, even without the rifled barrel. But for the purpose of home defense, we're going to be talking about buckshot. Again, we'll do that dissection in a second. So pump action, this gun holds 4 shells in the tube, so fairly limited capacity, but you are sending multiple projectiles downrange. Long guns are easier to use in terms of actually firing them accurately than handguns for a couple reasons. One is with a handgun, you typically have 2 points of contact. That's your hands. With a long gun, you have 2 points of contact of your hands, plus the shoulder, plus the cheek. So it helps stabilize the gun. The other thing is the trigger pull, which is measured in pounds, is almost always less heavy than the gun itself when it comes to long guns, whereas with a handgun it's not uncommon for that trigger pull to be many times heavier than the actual firearm. So keeping the firearm stable while you're exerting the force you need to pull the trigger on a handgun becomes something that you absolutely must learn and practice to stay proficient at it. So if you have a hunting shotgun, would this work for home defense? Absolutely. One of the great things about something like this 870 or a Mossberg 500 is by unscrewing this, taking this nut off, I can slide the barrel off and put a different barrel on. So this long barrel is absolutely great for blasting doves and hunting and shooting clays. For maneuvering around a home, not so much. So you could go down to the legal limit, I think it's 18.5 inches on a shotgun, or 20-inch range and have a much more maneuverable gun. And then swap it back over for hunting season or whatever you want to do. So that is one great advantage with this. I mentioned earlier that you might have inherited a gun. This is an older style. It's a new production gun. It's not a particularly old gun in and of itself, but the style is fairly old. And this is a double barrel 12 gauge shotgun. This particular one is a CZ hammer coach. So the barrels are a bit shorter. They're 20-inch barrels. About 1.5 inches longer than the legal limit on shotgun barrels. You can't go any shorter than that without doing special paperwork and getting a tax stamp for a short barrel shotgun. So this is, by double barrel, it breaks open. You have 2 barrels, 2 chambers. You put your shells in, you close it. Some of these shotguns have internal hammers, so by doing that, you've cocked the internal hammers. This one has external, so you then have to manually cock these hammers to fire. You have 2 triggers, One controls one barrel, one controls the other. 2-round capacity is not great, so you can get something like this. This is cheap from Walmart, and have a couple extra shells ready to go. So with 2 in the gun, 5 here, that's 7 rounds of buckshot out of this shotgun. Some modern shooters would say something like this is absolutely terrible for home defense. I tend to disagree. Something like this is very easy for a novice to understand. Opens, it's either loaded or it's not. Closes, you have to cock these. This external hammer part may be the only part that would be a little bit of a hindrance, and then you pull your triggers and you open it, get your empties out, put new ones in. It's very straightforward, easy to understand process. Not a whole lot can go wrong with that. And they are fairly common to be passed down. So again, if you find yourself with one of these, maybe you have one with a longer barrel that's a sporting shotgun, it still shoots 12 gauge ammunition, and modern shotguns can handle modern defensive 12 gauge ammunition. The ammo, again, is part of what drives the efficacy of shotguns. Just because I have 12 gauges here doesn't mean things like 20 gauge aren't okay either. This just happens to be what I have. So we're gonna go ahead, break down a couple shot shells, and I'll show you the difference between birdshot and buckshot. So here we have a buckshot shell. Brand doesn't really matter. Shot size is measured in numbers. So this is considered a double-aught buckshot, 2-0 buckshot. Now the white powder in here is a buffer. It helps as a filler between the pellets while they're in here. Now while I was cutting this apart, these little wings here would go around this, and it kind of forms a cup that exits the barrel. And you see these are not insignificant. These are 0.33 diameter, 9 of them. 9 pellet buckshot. There's a phenomenon called the 9th pellet flyer. Sometimes 8 of them will do a pretty nice pattern, and then you'll have one that just does its own thing. That can become a liability in a defensive context. So 8 pellet double-aught buckshot might be your best bet. Again, you'll have to pattern it out of your shotgun to see what it likes best and does best with. So something like this, very common defensive load. Over here, this one's got like a little piston. This is a birdshot load. I do want to note here on the holes, you can see the brass section of these shells is a little bit different. This is a low brass shell. This is a high brass shell. You can see the brass comes up higher. These typically have more powder, a more stout charge behind them. From the back, just says 12 gauge. This happens to be a Remington. And this one says 12 gauge, and it happens to be a Federal. So you can get a little bit of a context clue just by the brass. Now there's a lot of hunting loads that have birdshot, these smaller pellets, and this cup actually came off intact. But you can see how tiny those are compared to, we'll put a few out here and put a couple of these buckshot next to it for scale. So there's a lot more of these birdshot pellets in this shell than there are these buckshot, but they're so small, they really don't penetrate well against humans or anything large. Like you would never dream of hunting a deer or something with this. This, as the name might imply, would be perfectly fine for hunting or even using slugs. So a lot of these tinier pellets, they tend to spread out more. We'll actually do some shooting down there on a target, and I'll show you what the pattern looks like. And we'll use that double barrel coach gun for that. So that's those are 2 common types. Again, I just really wanted to drive home, even though this birdshot is typically the most economical ammunition, it's really not suitable for a defensive context at all. Just can't stress that enough. You'll hear some people say that it is, but it's really bad information, and it could end up as a liability for you, or even causing you to get hurt, because it probably won't stop somebody effectively. This is a much safer bet, and find the one that your shotgun likes best. All right, folks, so we're gonna go live here and shoot a little bit. I got the coach gun, 2 different shell types here. So we've got a buckshot, which is gonna be our first one, with 9 pellet, like the one we took apart, just different color. And then we've got an identical copy of that birdshot. We have the target at 7 yards, which is approximately 21 feet. Again, this isn't particularly far, and the target does have some anatomical stuff we'll look at when we shoot. So I'm going to do the first shot with the buckshot because it's 9 pellet, and then we'll do the bird shot. I'm going to shoot both center mass because that's the ideal spot to aim defensively. So we'll do the buckshot first, and then we'll go bird shot. All right, so that one's stuck. We'll go down there, take a look, and see what we did. That bead for aiming is right there in the middle of two barrels. So here's your buckshot holes. Again, that's a lot bigger than the diameter of the pellet. Part of that's just tearing the paper. This big hole here is going to be from the wad, which is that shot cup that holds everything. So we see those a little bit to the right. We did get a hit here on the heart, several in the lung. This one's a marginal hit. So the notion that you don't need to aim with a shotgun, you kind of do. Come over here and you can see the left barrel with the bird shot. That's from the wad, the shot cup. Those holes are a lot smaller. So on paper, they look like they do, you know, equal damage, but they really don't. We had several that missed or were marginal hits at best. So I'm going to repeat this. Get this in your mind. I'm going to go get the shotgun with a longer barrel, and we're going to do the same test. We'll do a buckshot. We're going to aim a little bit lower this time. Same distance. We'll do buckshot and then a bird shot. Okay, so we're back out. We've got the 870. Again, we're going to go lower on the target this time. We've got a buckshot up first and then that bird shot. So pump action. There it is. So a lot longer barrel with the choke. Gun's clear, safety's on. Good opportunity too. I never want to assume the experience level of somebody watching on this channel. It's a habit I want to get in. So eye protection, ear protection is a must. You only have your hearing that you have, and then the eyes that you have. So, you know, we're shooting these pellets. There are steel targets out here. They could hit something out in the berm. We don't want to end up having a ricochet come back. So safety first, good eye protection, good ear protection. These axles are great. They're electronic, so they not only do they protect my hearing, they also have electronics in them, so I can pick up ambient noise. I could sit here and have a conversation with somebody, and when over a certain decibel rating, that will cut out and protects your ears. They're very comfortable. Extremely useful if you're going to go take training or a class. You can hear what the instructor's saying and protect your hearing. Let's go look at the target. So a lot of our buckshot was occluded there because of the birdshot pattern being so dense. So let's we'll do another buckshot up top, and hopefully that'll separate it. But you can see the birdshot pattern down here is a lot more dense than the one out of the coach gun. Part of that's just the longer barrel, and part of that is the choke that's installed on this shotgun, designed to keep a tighter pattern further out. You know, shooting doves is what I've got it set up for now. If you have a pattern like that, this close, there's going to be gaps big enough for doves to fly through at longer ranges where you would typically be shooting doves. So a tighter pattern here, if I can speak. So we'll do one more buckshot up at the head, and then we'll look at it. All right, so we're just going to do one more round of buckshot. Keep some on the sling here. So, yeah. All right, gun's clear, safety's on. Let's go take a look at that one. So again, that big gaping hole there, probably the wad. You can see we had a couple pellet impacts there, at least one there, 3 or 4, maybe 5 there. A much tighter pattern at any rate than the pattern out of the coach gun. Does it mean the coach gun's a bad defensive option? No, but this is what I'm talking about. Pattern your gun at the ranges you're most likely to need it. If you get closer to the target, that pattern's going to close up even more. With a gun like this, chances are most shotguns, closer you are, the more dense the pattern's going to be. Now I realize it seems like I probably am really pushing for you to use a shotgun. It's not that at all. It's just that the shotgun itself is fairly simple. The ammunition is where there's a lot of confusion and just bad information out there. Would birdshot work? Maybe. It's definitely less than optimal. You do run the risk of not reliably stopping a threat. Remember, the only time we're going to use deadly force is if our lives or that of our families in danger. So, kind of important, right? To stop the person from doing whatever it is they're trying to do. You'll have a much better shot at doing that with something like that double-aught buckshot, or even this number 4 buckshot, not number 4 bird, number 4 buck. These are kind of a middle ground. There's 27 pellets in here instead of 9. Again, pattern your gun. I would think that that's acceptable too. The other thing we didn't discuss is the recoil of the buckshot versus birdshot. Birdshot's very low recoiling. The heavier the gun and longer the gun typically, the better that recoil is going to be soaked up. The coach gun kicks a lot. The coach gun has much more recoil than does the 870. Everything's a bit of a trade-off. I'm not necessarily pushing you in that direction. I think they're a perfectly viable tool, and they have been working well in that role for a very long time. On the topic of ammunition, we're going to look at 2 9mm rounds, very common caliber. So this first one here, this is just a 9mm, what we would call a full metal jacket. This is a target round. The bullet exits the barrel, impacts the target, it makes a ding on steel, hole in paper. This is also a 9mm, but this is a jacketed hollow point, has that hollow cavity in the front. These are designed to expand in a perfect world when they encounter a soft target, such as a body, or you see them sometimes with hunting ammunition. You also see things like this. 357 Magnum has an exposed lead. This is considered a soft point for hunting. The concept is largely the same, that the bullet will then open up. In the case of the hollow point, it fills with soft tissue, forces expansion, and in an ideal set of circumstances, that bullet will then mushroom out at the head, and it will impart some drag on the projectile and stop it. There's a twofold reason to use hollow points. One is, as that bullet opens up, it cuts tissue rather than pushing it out of the way, whereas something like a full metal jacket is more likely to pass through tissue without causing major trauma. This isn't some morbid fascination with trying to hurt other people. The only time we would use this is if we needed to defend our life or that of someone else. It's not that we want to hurt anybody, but if we need them to stop, then we really need them to stop. The aspect of the hollow point where it slows down as it mushrooms out helps limit the potential for the bullet to pass through with enough energy to kill or harm somebody else on the other side of the intended target. It's not a 100% guarantee, but it does greatly reduce the chances of that happening, and it's kind of the responsible thing to do, to carry good defensive ammunition. The goal here isn't to inflict the most damage possible, it's to get somebody to stop doing such heinous things that you needed to use this level of force in the first place. How much damage is inflicted is secondary to them stopping that behavior. So that's that on that. For rifle ammunition, there's a lot of offerings covering the gamut of calibers. Different calibers, you're going to look at different things. If you have a rifle shooting 357 Magnum, hollow points or soft points. If you have 300 blackout, soft point ammunition. Ballistic tip, which just has a little polymer, I don't think I have any out here, little polymer section at the nose of the bullet to help facilitate expansion. There's so many options, I can't begin to cover them all. So the main point of the video though, and I don't want to get away from that, is don't be so quick to feel like you've got to run and spend a ton of money to be able to defend yourself. Any of the tools I showed you today will work in a defensive context if you will put in the time to get proficient with them. The firearm and self-defense market exists to sell things, and that's not inherently bad. Each time they come out with something new, like Stealth Arms Platypus. Now this gun wasn't particularly marketed as a defensive gun, but it definitely could be. There are people using them as duty firearms in law enforcement security capacity. If you already have even a stock one of these P07s or a Glock or what have you, just because they come out with this doesn't necessarily mean you need to go buy it and upgrade. Use your discretion, and if you're already shooting the other gun well enough and you have the proficiency standards down, then use your best judgment. Obviously, I am a firearms enthusiast. One could argue that I certainly have more than I need from a defensive standpoint, and that's probably true. I also enjoy hunting, and I enjoy shooting for the sake of shooting. So I'm not saying don't buy. I'm saying that don't feel pressured to buy if you already have a serviceable firearm. Seek out good training from a reputable instructor. They should never be asking you to do something that they can't demonstrate. Well, this is going to wrap up today's video and the inaugural Toccoa Defensive Training channel's video. So pretty excited to start this. If you stumble across this channel first and you haven't checked out my other channel, there will be links to the guns and stuff that I've used here, as well as any other pertinent videos I may have covered over on Archetype of Man. You can go over there. If you're more interested in the review stuff, drop a subscribe. I've been doing that channel for about 5 years. That is more focused on the review side of the equation, whereas here we'll be talking about more of the philosophy, methods, and things like that. So thank you for watching. If you found the video helpful, please consider subscribing and dropping a like as well. It means a lot to me. Guys, stay safe, make sure you get your training, and get out and practice. Shooting's a perishable skill. It will go away if you don't use it. All right, I'll see y'all next time.